Some people think that science essentially disproves or seriously puts in doubt any notion of a spiritual universe that is sympathetic to the human heart and human longing. In other words, science, the belief goes, has really shown that the universe is simply a dead machine that is following mechanical rules, and when we die, that's it. Extinction of consciousness, vast endless cosmos, everything gone in however many billion years, entropy, etc., etc. No shred of evidence that there is anything divine or spiritual or an afterlife. That's all hocus pocus. And this video is a little bit abstract perhaps, but I want to talk about this essential thing that gets missed when we imagine that Western ways of approaching reality somehow get at ultimate reality and ultimate truth. What are the Western ways of approaching reality I'm talking about? Well, if we disregard religion for now, Western religion, which of course Christianity does talk about a loving universe, a spiritual universe essentially, the Western ways of thinking that are more humanistic and rationalistic are, we have a tradition of philosophy, which isn't so much cared about these days, and science. Science is the big one. Science has become kind of the worldview for a lot of Western intellectuals. But let's talk about what science and philosophy, if you want to include that, really can say about ultimate reality. And the amazing thing is, this is something that the most brilliant physicists, scientists, people in general miss all the time. It's very reminiscent of that story of the emperor with no clothes, where the little kid says, hey, he's not wearing any clothes. So what I want to talk about is this very obvious, simple idea, and I would say fact, that gets missed all the time when we imagine that this Western way of approaching reality can talk about ultimate reality. Now, I am in no way dismissing science as a discipline and an approach to the world, because science is an incredible enterprise. It's given us so much technology, obviously, so many benefits. So this is in no way disparaging what science's contribution is to our world and to our lives. What I'm talking about is the notion that science can address ultimate issues, the ultimate issues that spiritual masters point to. And Christ was one of these spiritual masters. I'm not talking about Christianity, the church. I'm talking about Jesus Christ himself, and there are so many other spiritual masters. So, what is the big thing that scientists miss? How do philosophers and scientists talk about, explain, address reality? If you've noticed, they always use language and logic. No Western philosopher was a painter. What do I mean by that? Well, a painting conveys information and meaning, just like words do. However, we don't accept the kind of meaning and information that's in a painting as somehow really explaining the world. We need our answers to ultimate reality in the Western tradition. We need them to be expressed in language or logic. Let's think about what that means. Consider the video that you're watching right here, and I'm going to give you about 15 seconds of silence to just take in the experience of what you're observing the sights and the sounds, but don't form any words about it. Just take in the experience for about 15 seconds. Okay, we'll start that now. Okay, so that experience you had is reality. Now imagine trying to describe what you just saw using words, or modeling what you just saw using equations, perhaps for waves. Could the words and the equations even come close to describing the complete experience you just had? The experience you just had. And even more than that, the words and the equations wouldn't be the experience you had. They would be words and equations. They wouldn't be the experience you had. The words and equations that you would be using would be in your experience. Now, I'm using the words reality and experience interchangeably because really we can't say more about reality than what we're experiencing. Of course, I can believe someone else's experience, but really reality is our experience. Language and logic are phenomenon within experience. They don't contain experience. They don't completely describe experience. They are always inside experience. Experience isn't inside language and logic. So let's say that using the word reality. Language and logic are in reality. Reality is not in language and logic. That's it in a nutshell. This is the mistake that we make when we think that Western ways of describing reality with language and logic can say something about ultimate reality. Spiritual masters recognize what I've said because spiritual masters are interested in ultimate reality. They are authentically, passionately, persistently interested in ultimate reality. You see, Western intellectual culture is not. That's why Western intellectual culture stops at language and logic. So, spiritual masters recognize that language and logic are elements within experience, and they are not adequate for ultimate reality. So, what this means is you can't use language and logic to express ultimate truths, or not, you can't use language and logic to fully express ultimate truth. It doesn't mean we just throw away language and logic as useless. Right? I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying language and logic are not adequate. And this is why sometimes spiritual masters, when they're talking about absolute ultimate truth, will use parables, metaphors, and even what seems like nonsense. All right? But think about the actual literal meaning of that word, nonsense. We're used to thinking of nonsense as something to just dismiss, right? As not true. But we've just discovered that sense, being something inside reality, isn't adequate to describing all of reality. There's something outside of sense, so non-sense, not sense, that is still in reality, that is still in truth. So sometimes nonsense is necessary and nonsense is true. This is why we sometimes get statements from spiritual masters that are paradoxes. Paradoxes look impossible only because they're seen through the lens of language and logic. But helpful paradoxes gesture at truth, at ultimate truth. One of the founders of modern physics, founders of what we call quantum physics, Niels Bohr, said, "The opposite of a superficial truth is a falsehood. But the opposite of a profound truth is another profound truth." You see, modern physics and Niels Bohr discovered that at the most fundamental level of reality, things start behaving in ways that seem extremely illogical. For example, particles somehow turn into waves and vice versa, or they're both waves and particles at the same time, which doesn't make any sense. This is a huge topic. It's called quantum physics if you want to read more about it. And I write some about this in a book called The Science Spell. There's an essay on this. I'll put the link to that below. But back to spirituality. You see, spirituality is about experience. It's not about logic and language. Or let's say it contains logic and language. Spirituality is about experience, and experience is larger than language and logic. And when I say language and logic, I'm including concepts in that. Any concept is also in experience, is also in reality. So I think this topic is important because it could be that a lot of intellectuals just look at a spiritual statement that might be a paradox and just dismiss spirituality altogether as nonsense and untrue. But I'm hoping that an appreciation for what I'm talking about in this video could help people to understand sort of the whole attempt of spirituality to get at ultimate truths and ultimate experience. And I think this is particularly important because science is so powerful and has helped us so much that we've been tempted to think that it can tell us that the universe is this dead mechanical place. And I believe the human soul feels and knows otherwise. I believe it is part of being human to want and feel a greater meaning to the universe than just a little flicker of life that gets extinguished. And I believe that that knowing in our hearts is there because it's true. But I think when that knowing meets with a world or a culture that tells it, that knowing is silly, that knowing is nonsense. Get real, look at the scientific facts. That's depressing. So I think if we can be open to exploring the spiritual literature, which is immense, if we can be open to meditation, to allowing ourselves to get in touch with some of these greater truths and get past this idea that it's science has proven that's all nonsense, if we can let ourselves go into these other greater realms of experience and knowing, we can find meaning and aliveness and satisfaction in our lives.